Imagine going to a normal place wearing sweatpants, no makeup, and simply trying to spend time with your family. And suddenly, people are screaming your name. Not because you're standing on a red carpet. Not because you're promoting a movie. But because the world has recognized you. That is exactly the kind of reality Jenna Ortega says she experienced after Wednesday exploded. And the most surprising part? She says it happened almost overnight. But there was much more behind Jenna's sudden fame than viral clips, red carpets, and millions of fans. There were overwhelming crowds. There were moments she described as some of the most insane experiences of her life. And then there's a completely different side of her story. The young actress Jenna looked up to long before she became one of Hollywood's biggest young stars. Her name? Dakota Fanning. So today, we're going inside Jenna Ortega's own words to uncover what really changed after Wednesday. How sudden fame affected her everyday life, what happened when fans recognized her, and eventually became. Stay until the end, because the final part completely changes the way you might look at Jenna's journey. Before Wednesday, Jenna Ortega was already a working actress. She wasn't someone who appeared out of nowhere. She had spent years acting and building experience as a young performer. But Wednesday changed the scale of everything. During the interview, Jenna was asked which project could completely change the way people treated her overnight. Her answer was essentially immediate: Wednesday. And she wasn't exaggerating. Jenna described the transformation as something that really happened overnight. Think about that. One day you're a young actress working in Hollywood. Then suddenly, a character you've played becomes one of the most recognizable characters on television. People who may have never followed your career before suddenly know your face. They know your character. They know your voice. They know your expressions. And suddenly, even ordinary moments don't feel ordinary anymore. That's where Jenna's story becomes fascinating. Because fame isn't just about premieres. It's what happens when the cameras aren't supposed to be there. One of the most revealing parts of the interview comes when Jenna talks about being recognized while she was simply spending time with family. She describes being out with her nephew. She wasn't dressed for an event. She wasn't wearing a glamorous Hollywood outfit. She says she was wearing sweats and no makeup. In other words, she was just being herself. But then people recognized her. And according to Jenna, the reaction was intense. She described people screaming from their cars and trying to get around so they could take a photograph with her. Imagine experiencing that in an ordinary public place. You haven't prepared yourself mentally for thousands of eyes. You haven't walked onto a stage. You're just trying to live a normal moment. And suddenly, your identity as a celebrity enters the room. This is the part of fame that audiences rarely see. We see celebrities at award shows. We see professional photographs. We see interviews where everything is organized. But Jenna's story shows the other side. The side where fame follows you into everyday life. And there's something particularly interesting about her description. She wasn't presenting herself as some untouchable superstar. She was literally describing a moment when she was dressed casually and without makeup. Yet people still recognized her. That tells you something about how powerful the Wednesday character had become. People weren't simply recognizing a glamorous Hollywood actress. They were recognizing Wednesday Addams. And Jenna had become inseparable from that image in the public imagination. But that wasn't even the biggest example. Jenna also talked about her experience at Brazil Comic-Con. And her description was striking. She called it one of the most insane experiences she had ever had in her life. Think about the timing. The show had only been released relatively recently. The global reaction was still exploding. And Jenna was suddenly standing in front of an enormous audience that had connected deeply with the character. She described the environment as feeling almost unreal. At one point, she compared the energy in the building to an earthquake. People were passing out. The atmosphere was intense. And yet she also remembered that the fans were very sweet. That combination is important. The experience could be overwhelming and still deeply meaningful. Because behind the screaming crowds were people who genuinely connected with the show. People who had found a character they loved. People who wanted to see Jenna because she had brought that character to life. And that is where the success of Wednesday becomes more than just numbers. A successful show gets viewers. A cultural phenomenon creates experiences that actors themselves struggle to describe. And Jenna was suddenly experiencing that phenomenon firsthand. Here's something we often misunderstand about celebrity success. We hear the phrase, "She became famous overnight." But overnight fame doesn't mean overnight preparation. Jenna had spent years working before Wednesday. Her success may have appeared sudden to the public, but the work behind it wasn't sudden. And when the world finally noticed her, she had to adjust to an entirely different level of attention. Suddenly, Going outside could attract attention. Family moments could become public moments. A convention could become overwhelming. And a character could become so recognizable that people immediately connected her with it. That's a massive shift. And perhaps that's why Jenna's comments are more interesting than a simple, "Wednesday made me famous" story. Because she wasn't only talking about success. She was describing what success actually feels like when it enters your everyday life. And that distinction matters. Then the interview took an even more interesting turn. Jenna was asked about stereotypes surrounding child actors. This is a complicated subject because Hollywood has always had a particular image of young performers. People sometimes assume that child actors are completely different from ordinary kids. Or that growing up in the entertainment industry automatically creates a particular personality or lifestyle. But Jenna's response was refreshingly nuanced. She was asked whether it was wrong to say that many of those stereotypes are true. And rather than simply giving an easy answer, she essentially acknowledged that some of them can be true. That response is interesting because it doesn't try to create a perfect Hollywood story. Instead, it suggests that Jenna understands there are complicated realities behind being a young actor. And that's especially significant because she has lived through that experience herself. She started working young. She experienced the industry before becoming an internationally recognized star. And now she's able to look back at that journey with a different perspective. This is one of the reasons her story isn't simply, "Young actress becomes famous." It's, "Young actress grows up inside an industry that suddenly changes the scale of her life." And now we reach one of the most important parts of the interview. Jenna was asked, "Who were your earliest creative influences?" Her answer was Dakota Fanning. And Jenna didn't mention her casually. She explained that she had admired Dakota from a young age. What impressed Jenna wasn't simply Dakota's fame. It was the wisdom Jenna felt she saw in her. Jenna described watching a young girl who seemed to possess an unusual amount of wisdom. Almost as though Dakota had already experienced far more than someone her age normally would. And for Jenna, that became an example. A young actress could be taken seriously. A young actress could deliver powerful performances. A young actress could have an enormous presence on screen. And that mattered, because sometimes the people who influence us most aren't the people we personally know. They're the people we watch. The performances that stay in our minds. The actors who make us think, "I want to understand how they do that." For Jenna, Dakota Fanning appears to have been one of those people. This is the part of Jenna's story that is easy to forget. Before the millions of fans, before the global conventions, before the Wednesday phenomenon, there was simply a young Jenna watching other actors and learning. She wasn't born as Wednesday Addams. She didn't wake up one morning already knowing how to carry a global franchise. She learned. She watched. She worked. She took inspiration from other performers. And eventually, she became the actress that a new generation of young viewers would watch for inspiration. That's the full circle. Dakota Fanning inspired Jenna. And years later, Jenna Ortega became an inspiration for millions of young viewers. That's what makes her answer about Dakota so meaningful. Because successful actors don't develop in isolation. They learn from performances that came before them. They study people they admire. They take pieces of those influences and eventually create something of their own. And Jenna's career is a perfect example of that process. So what's the real story behind Jenna Ortega's success? It's not simply that Wednesday made her famous. That's only the surface. The deeper story is that Wednesday revealed the scale of an actress who had already spent years developing her craft. The show didn't create Jenna from nothing. It gave her a character powerful enough to introduce her to an enormous global audience. And suddenly, millions of people discovered what audiences who had followed her earlier career already knew. Jenna could command a screen. But with that success came something she couldn't completely control. Attention, crowds, recognition, and the loss of some ordinary moments. Her interview gives us a glimpse into that transformation. And perhaps that's the biggest exposé here. The glamorous image of overnight fame doesn't tell the whole story. Behind the viral success is an actor trying to adjust to a completely different reality. A reality where even wearing sweatpants and no makeup doesn't necessarily mean you're anonymous. A reality where walking into a convention can feel like an earthquake. And a reality where the character you played can become more recognizable than your own everyday identity. When people look at Jenna Ortega today, they often see the finished product. The star, the celebrity, the face of Wednesday. But Jenna's own story points backward. To the young actress she once watched. To the lessons she absorbed. To years of work before the world was paying attention. And that changes the entire narrative. Because the question isn't, how did Jenna Ortega become famous overnight? The better question is, how many years did Jenna spend preparing for the moment the world finally noticed her? Wednesday may have changed her life overnight. But Jenna Ortega's journey didn't begin overnight. It was already happening. Jenna Ortega's story is ultimately bigger than Wednesday. It's about what happens when years of quiet work suddenly collide with worldwide attention. It's about a young actress who once looked up to Dakota Fanning, and eventually became someone millions of people looked up to themselves. It's about the incredible highs of success, and the strange reality of being recognized even when you're simply trying to spend time with family. And perhaps most importantly, it's a reminder that what looks like overnight success is often the result of years of preparation that nobody saw. Jenna didn't become Jenna Ortega because of one night. One show simply gave the world a reason to finally look. So what do you think? Did Wednesday completely change Jenna Ortega's life, or did it simply reveal the talent she had been building for years? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into Jenna Ortega's story, subscribe and turn on notifications, because there's always another Hollywood story hiding behind the headlines. Until next time, the story you see on screen is only half the story.
Thanks for watching. Like, share and subscribe. Bye bye. Love you all.